Stricken with a fever so intense I could barely move, I beseeched my eldest son to fetch me a simple glass of water. It seemed a modest request, but instead of water, he returned with a brimming glass of beer. In his carelessness, he spilled it over me, the fevered patient in bed. From the doorway, mocking laughter echoed. His wife, amused and clapping, joined in. My son, chuckling, held up the empty cup. Through the haze of illness, the scene seared into my mind with painful clarity. Clean up the house before we get back, okay? I endured the lump in my throat to ensure they heard me. Yes, all clean, I managed to say. My name is Helen, a 73-year-old housewife. My husband George, at 75, now retired, found joy teaching calligraphy to children at the local community center. Calligraphy had been his lifelong passion, and seeing him pursue it with daily enthusiasm brought me great happiness. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married with 2 young children. However, our 44-year-old eldest son remains unmarried, living at home. He sporadically works nights at a convenience store, contributing nothing financially while leading a lax existence. Despite our admonitions, he remains indifferent. Neither gambling nor debt plagues him, and gradually, my husband and I ceased our futile warnings. One day, out of nowhere, our eldest son announced, "I've gotten married," and brought his wife home without so much as a greeting. She entered as if it were the most natural thing, and from that moment on, I found myself preparing meals not just for my son, but for his wife as well. I didn't mind cooking for her, but she never lifted a finger to help or clean up. There were no thank yous, only demands like a cup of coffee after dinner. Unable to bear it any longer, my husband sternly confronted our son and his wife, who ceased their unreasonable requests in his presence. Yet behind my husband's back, she persisted with demands like, "Mother-in-law, please take this dress to the cleaners for me." I felt her demands were excessive and selfish. When I tried to address it, my son intervened, dismissing it as a minor inconvenience. However, our son contributes nothing financially to the household, even though we support him and his wife. I found the demands unreasonable and debated discussing it with my husband. Hoping to avoid family conflict, I hesitated and waited. Once again today, I found myself at the cleaners fulfilling my daughter-in-law's request. My husband and I frequently visit our younger son's family in Canada, typically twice a year. We planned another visit during the upcoming week-long federal holiday. Our grandchildren there adore us, and we've already bought their favorite toys as gifts, planning to pick up a roll cake as a special treat on the way. When we visit our younger son's family, we often opt for the sleeper train over a plane, savoring the scenic journey at a leisurely pace. While the aerial view is stunning, the train ride, now that we have more time, brings a deeper sense of calm. The day before our departure, feeling unusually excited, I bid farewell to my husband as he headed to his regular calligraphy class and set off for some shopping. On my way back, I couldn't resist stopping at a cake shop that had handmade cookies on display. Thinking they would delight our grandchildren longer than a cake, I bought a batch. As I walked home, imagining their happy faces, a light drizzle began, which soon intensified. I hurried, but not before my clothes were thoroughly soaked. I decided to seek refuge at a nearby convenience store, purchasing an umbrella to shield myself from the downpour. Arriving home, I was eager for a warm bath to ward off the chill. Just as I was about to indulge, my eldest son's wife entered abruptly. "Helen, are you about to bathe?" "I need to go out. Let me use the bath first." "Could you start dinner early?" With that, she closed the bathroom door. Despite it not being her home, I changed into dry clothes and began preparing dinner, trying to ignore the tickle in my throat from sneezing. The last thing I needed was to catch a cold before our trip tomorrow. Yet my eldest son's wife lingered in the bath for over an hour, oblivious to my discomfort. The next morning, on the day we planned to visit our younger son's family, I woke feeling sluggish. My throat was sore, and my nose was running. Checking my temperature confirmed I had a fever of 100 degrees Fahrenheit, likely caught from the rain the day before. Reluctantly, I asked George to go alone this time, not wanting to risk passing my cold to the grandchildren. George suggested canceling the visit, but with sleeper train tickets in hand and gifts already bought, I insisted he go. I handed him the cookies I purchased at the cake shop, reassuring him that with some rest and medicine, I would recover soon. George, who typically keeps conversations brief with our eldest son and his wife, took a moment that day to inform them of my condition and insisted they handle household tasks in his absence. After bidding George farewell with a smile, I intended to return to bed when I overheard my eldest son and his wife talking. It's just a cold, right? Dad's gone now, so we can relax for a bit, his wife remarked. I couldn't believe their indifference, especially considering they lived in our home without contributing financially. Yet sadly, such behavior had become typical of them. When you think about it, it's only because of your father that you're able to live here, I reminded my eldest son Mark and his wife. They seemed offended by this reality, responding defensively, "We're actually doing you a favor by staying with you in your old age." That's true. Most people wouldn't want to live with their in-laws, added my daughter-in-law, ironically forgetting they had moved in without being invited, yet acting as if they were doing us a tremendous favor. Feeling weary and wishing to rest early, I brushed off their remarks and retreated to my room. Later that evening, my daughter-in-law barged in and woke me up. "Mother-in-law, you're not planning to skip cooking just because you're a bit sick, are you? You know I can't cook, right?" It wasn't something a 35-year-old woman should be asking her mother-in-law. Feeling unwell, I wish they would manage their own meals. My husband should have warned them before leaving in the morning. Attempting to ignore them and return to sleep, my daughter-in-law refused to leave. Deciding it would be better to eat something light and take medicine, I reluctantly got up and headed to the kitchen. As I prepared the meal, Mark returned home. Despite seeing me in a mask in the kitchen, he said nothing as if it were entirely normal. To make matters worse, he demanded, "Hey, is the bath ready yet?" It was clear Mark and his wife had little concern for my health. Knowing they wouldn't listen and eager to rest, I hurriedly finished preparing the meal and went to prepare the bath. Returning to the living room, I found Mark and his wife engrossed in lively conversation while eating. "We're leaving on a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, so please try not to spread your cold to us," my daughter-in-law said suddenly. Surprised by their unexpected announcement of an overseas trip, I followed my daughter-in-law's suggestion to eat a light meal in the dining room, away from the cozy living room where the couple excitedly discussed their upcoming 3-week journey to Europe. Mark had taken time off from his part-time job for this trip. I hadn't heard a word about their plans to travel abroad, but I felt a sense of relief knowing they would be away starting the day after tomorrow. However, on the morning of their departure, my cold had worsened to the point where I could barely leave my bed. When I checked my temperature, it was nearly 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Thirsty and suffering from a pounding headache, I struggled to even lift my head. In this state, Mark approached me. "Hey, can you make us something to eat? You can still cook even with a cold." Tears welled up in my eyes at the sight of my son asking his sick mother to cook for him. "They'll eat out," I managed to utter. Mark frowned at my words but left the room without a word. Before he exited, I asked for a glass of water, hoping he would show at least that much consideration. I waited expectantly. However, when Mark returned, it was with a glass full of beer, which he carelessly spilled over me, lying in bed with a high fever. Laughter erupted from the doorway. Turning to look, I saw my eldest son's wife clapping in amusement. Beside her, Mark stood laughing, holding an empty cup. It was surreal. Despite my feverish state, the scene seared into my memory. "Make sure the house is spotless before we return," haha, she mocked. I had endured their selfishness until now, but I could take no more. "Yes, I'll keep it pristine," I managed to reply despite the pain in my throat. Mark and his wife departed cheerfully. Exhausted, I lacked the energy even to wipe the beer from my face and fell asleep where I lay. Upon waking, I felt somewhat refreshed, albeit groggy. I remembered the moment Mark splashed me with beer, but strangely, I didn't feel sticky at all. The bedding was changed too. As I pondered what had transpired, my husband George entered with a basin. Seeing me sitting up, he gently touched my forehead and asked, "How are you feeling?" Confused by George's unexpected presence, I tried to ask why he wasn't with our second son's family, but my words wouldn't come out. Sensing my bewilderment, George began to explain. He had taken the sleeper train to visit our younger son's family, but grew concerned about my well-being and returned early, not trusting Mark and his wife to care for me. And upon advice from our younger son's family, he hurried back home. Upon his arrival, George found me exhausted in bed, faintly smelling of beer. He quickly cleaned my face with a damp cloth, tidied up the room, and watched over me as I slept through the day. When George asked about what happened, I struggled to speak. The memory of Mark's actions brought tears to my eyes. Seeing this, George fetched me some water and said softly, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. Just rest for now." He then went to prepare porridge, having anticipated my need for nourishment upon waking. His thoughtfulness moved me to tears once more. Thanks to George's devoted care, I regained my strength over the next 2 days. When I recounted what had happened to George upon his return, his expression hardened. "I've had enough," I confessed. "So have I," he replied quietly. 3 weeks had passed since Mark and his wife departed for their overseas trip. Enjoying peaceful days with George, my phone suddenly rang. It was Mark calling. "Here we go," I sighed, answering the call. "What on earth? Why is our house gone?" "Well, didn't you tell us to clean the house?" I retorted. After recovering from my illness, I recounted to George everything that had transpired, how they had neglected me while sick, even splashing beer on me before departing on their trip. Listening to my account, George muttered grimly, "I can't take this anymore." In the past, I had always been the one to calm George down. However, after this incident, I no longer felt inclined to soothe him. I couldn't forgive their behavior myself. Secretly, George and I had been planning to build a new house without informing our eldest son and his wife. Although the construction wasn't yet complete, we had moved into a temporary rental apartment and swiftly sold our previous home. To add to their surprise, we had spread the rumor that our land was being purchased for a commercial development, facilitating the quick sale. Originally, we had intended to keep the old house for our eldest son and his wife. However, after their treatment of us, we no longer felt any obligation toward them. The property had already been cleared, leaving them undoubtedly shocked to find it gone. The new house should be ready in about 2 weeks, a carpenter, who had kindly agreed to store our cherished belongings and furniture during the transition, informed us. "We've disposed of all your son's and his wife's belongings," I explained to them. In response, our eldest son interrupted. "Are you kidding me? I'll call the police." In the background, his wife joined in shouting. At that moment, George took the phone from my hand and switched it to speaker mode. "All of your belongings are gone," he stated firmly. "Go ahead, call the police. We will too. You threw beer at your sick mother and then went on a vacation abroad. You even made her do housework while she was ill. Who do you think is in the wrong here? It's not us." George's demeanor was resolute as he addressed our eldest son, his voice low and firm. "This isn't about that. Selling the house was our decision. As for where we'll live, that's our concern. Where are you staying now?" Our son shot back angrily. "This house was ours to sell, and as of now, you're no longer our son. Don't contact us again," George concluded before hanging up. 2 weeks later, we received a call informing us that our new house was ready. Excited, George and I headed over immediately. The call came from the carpenter, a close friend of George's who also supervised the construction site. At around 60 years old, he guided us through the house, detailing its layout. We had designed it with our future retirement in mind, opting for a single-story accessible layout. The result exceeded our expectations in beauty, and we couldn't wait to begin our new life there. The carpenters had already arranged the furniture we had left in the living room. When we expressed our gratitude, they simply replied, "No problem. George helped us out in the past, so this is the least we could do." With that, George and I settled into our new home. Life in the new house was even more comfortable than we had imagined, and we enjoyed a peaceful existence without the presence of our eldest son and his wife. However, about a month after our move, our eldest son and his wife unexpectedly appeared at our doorstep. Neither George nor I had disclosed our new address to them, and our second son, Mark, and his wife were unaware as well. They must have hired a detective or employed some other means to track us down after we had explained the situation to them. "Hey, it's not fair for you to sell the house, dispose of our belongings, and move to such a nice place on your own. As your eldest son, I have every right to live here, don't I?" Our son stood before us, glaring, holding large bags in his hands. We had planned to cut ties with them, but we were taken aback to find our eldest son and his wife clearly intending to move in. Just then, noises came from the back of the house. "What are you doing here? After taking over our home, how dare you demand such a thing?" I exclaimed, blocking their path as they attempted to enter. As tensions rose, the front door suddenly swung open. "Huh? Mark, what are you doing here?" Stephen exclaimed in disbelief. Beside him, his wife and their 2 grandchildren had come to visit, having just completed their move into the new house. After a relaxing afternoon at home, Stephen's family had ventured out to a nearby convenience store. "Who are they? Are they bad people?" asked fifth grader Sophia innocently. The husband, who had been on the verge of sending Mark and his wife away, suddenly had an idea. Since Stephen's family is staying for a week, you two can stay here as well. But I won't allow you to stay indefinitely, he stated firmly, welcoming everyone inside. In the living room, Mark and his wife settled on the sofa. Phew, I'm exhausted. Mom, could I get some coffee? Mark requested casually. I take mine black, added Stephen's wife, taken aback by the unexpected demand. The grandchildren, observing this, rushed over to Mark and his wife. Why can't you do that yourselves? Even though we're kids, we pour our own drinks, one of the grandchildren remarked innocently, making Mark's wife uneasy. She went to pour her own coffee, but the children's questions continued. Why can't you cook? My mom can make anything, and why don't you clean up after yourselves? My dad and I always clear the plates after meals. My sister and I do it too, the grandchildren pointed out, influenced by their responsible upbringing under Stephen's wife's care. Stephen himself didn't leave everything to his wife. They shared household responsibilities. It was clear the grandchildren found it perplexing that Mark and his wife didn't do these basic tasks themselves. Initially, Mark and his wife pushed back, but the relentless comments from the grandchildren wore them down by the end of the week. Mark's wife, especially, bristled at being called auntie. Don't call me auntie, she insisted to the grandchildren. Their response, but you are an auntie, right? You're not young enough to be a sister, left her stunned. Even Stephen and I, listening nearby, couldn't help but chuckle. After Stephen and his family departed, we promptly asked Mark and his wife to leave. Exhausted from the constant teasing by the children, they didn't resist much. However, a few months later, we received a message asking, "Can you lend us some money?" Until then, they had stayed in our home, eating our food without contributing to rent or living expenses. Mark, working part-time at a convenience store, earned enough to cover their costs, so it hadn't been an issue. Now that they were no longer living with us, they were supposed to be responsible for their own expenses. Yet it seemed they continued to spend as before, relying on borrowed money without any savings to fall back on. Their sole income came from Mark's part-time job at a convenience store, where he worked 4 days a week. Mark's wife showed no inclination to find employment. Given their circumstances, it was quite audacious of them to ask, "Can you lend us some money?" "We won't lend you money in the future, nor will we offer any further assistance," we firmly informed them, and subsequently blocked Mark's number. A few days later, while my husband and I were away, we received a call from our home security company on my husband's phone. There had been an intruder detected in our house, and they sent us video footage. As it turned out, Mark and his wife had attempted to break into our house through a window. It was disheartening to see them resort to such measures, driven by financial desperation. Fortunately, they didn't cause any damage beyond their attempted break-in, though that was little consolation. Security promptly apprehended Mark and his wife, and police were called to the scene. Due to their relationship with us, they were released after a stern reprimand. Since then, they ceased trying to force their way into our home or any further break-ins. With their numbers blocked, we no longer receive any calls from them. According to Stephen, our second son, he also received a plea for money from Mark. It appeared Mark had borrowed money from loan sharks and was now evading them due to inability to repay. "You reap what you sow. Deal with your debts on your own," Stephen firmly responded, promptly blocking Mark's number. As for what became of Mark and his wife thereafter, we decided to let go of thoughts about those who had callously treated us, especially during the incident with the beer. With no further ties to Mark and his wife, my husband and I are relishing our peaceful daily lives. Previously, my husband taught calligraphy classes at a nearby community center, but now he teaches from a dedicated space we've set up at home. When Stephen and his family visit, the grandchildren and other children enjoy joining in calligraphy classes together, bonding and making new friends. These tranquil days are a blessing, and we cherish each moment.